Hello and welcome to the latest Marketing Briefs webinar from Ledger Bennett DGA. My name's Bonnie. I'll be a host and one of the presenters today for our webinar. The topic of today's webinar is to boldly go where no gating strategy has gone before. So just before we get started, just wanted to tell you a little bit of information about our Marketing Briefs webinar series. So we've been running a series of webinars now every 2 weeks for probably about nearly 2 months now. Each webinar is about 30 minutes long with the opportunity to ask questions at the end. We've intentionally made them very short, focused and free of marketing jargon, so hopefully it will accommodate everybody that's listening. We've got some upcoming webinars, so on social selling on the 14th of September, and the General Data Protection Regulations on the 28th of September, otherwise known as the GDPR. So if you're interested in any of the upcoming topics, then obviously just drop us an email at demandmore@lbdga.com. So just to quickly introduce myself then, as I mentioned, my name's Bonnie. I'm a Senior Content Strategist here at Ledger Bennett. I've been here just for over 12 months now. So my role at the agency is absolutely about making sure that we're delivering that journey to multiple personas across multiple different layers of that buyer journey. So what I will do is think about that story, think about what's changed and pain our personas might have, and then making sure that we actually have content to deliver against those pains and challenges. So joining me today is my colleague Greg Dorban.
Hi,
Hello,
everyone.
Greg. Greg's our head of inbound marketing. Greg, would you just like to quickly introduce yourself?
Yep, so my world meets Bonnie's world in effect when we look at taking that story and how we turn a contact from unknown to known. So how we drive conversions, how we drive top of the funnel engagement inquiries, and usually how that's deployed across various different technology platforms to make it work and sync seamlessly with CRM, with market automation, and everywhere that we need to understand how gating and forms and conversion is working.
Fantastic. So today's agenda then, what we'll be covering. So first point is, what's the difference then between a good and a bad gating strategy? The next point is that we'll be understanding the value of your content. Third point is how to deploy your gating strategy. And then the fourth is what's best practice for regional differences. And what I would say is that we will have time for questions at the end. If you do have any questions that you'd like to ask, just pop them into the text box at the bottom of your screen and we'll make sure that we get round to those at the end of the webinar. So, launching into our first point then. So, because we have got a Star Trek theme today, I thought I would give you a bit of a Star Trek image to start off with. So, why do people gate their content? And there's Luke Picard saying, good question. So basically there are three real reasons why people might actually deploy a gating strategy. So first of all, it's about capturing that data from your inbound traffic and making sure that you're really seeing that return on investment of any funds that are invested there. The second then is that you're allowing, you have the ability then to profile your audience progressively, and that's really, really important, simply because what you don't want to do is if you have a wide variety of information that you'd like to gather about your audience, that you're not hitting them with a form that goes on for 3 pages long. Instead, what we're doing is gathering information at various different steps along the way. The next point then is that we're also demonstrating that your content has value. So we'll be discussing what kind of content needs to be gated and what doesn't, but I think it's really important that you make sure that any gated content absolutely does intrinsically have a value to your audience. So then the first point, so what does make a good gating strategy? Well, the first point here is to think about is that there's a lot more to your gating strategy than just locking all your content away. And this is a mistake that sometimes we see with our clients. Because they've invested some time and efforts in actually developing this content, they feel that the best way to maximise the return on investment is to actually lock away all of that content. The problem is with that is that ultimately your audience or your prospects aren't really getting a good feel for exactly how valuable your content is. So actually giving them either a teaser of that content so in other words, a short excerpt or perhaps an executive summary before they get to a gate, or alternatively, you actually have some pieces of content that aren't gated at all, is a really good tactic. So a good gating strategy then is not solely driven by technology, but really you're thinking about your users as they're moving through that buyer journey. And really that's really, really important. There's no point in gating particular pieces of content at different stages if at that particular stage they aren't relevant to that particular prospect. And we'll talk more about that later on. The next point then is capturing their data progressively is also useful to tracking their buyer journey. So again, this idea or this concept of actually taking smaller pieces of data at various different stages through that journey and then amassing that data over time is a really good way of getting to know your prospects and starting to build that deeper relationship with them. So just being able to see how much information you have around your individual prospects is a good way of actually measuring how far they are through that buyer journey. So the first of the diagrams I'd like to show you here is, of course, a marketing funnel. So we've got discover, consider, decide there. So that's nothing new. And obviously, what I would definitely recommend here is that you start to actually build out your personas. So first of all, really understanding who your audience is and who you're talking to. Next, you need to perform a content audit and understand at different stages of that buyer journey where you actually have particular pieces of content, making sure that you have content at every single step of the way. And then the third point, which you've just seen illustrated down the funnel, is that you're then mapping content across different stages of that buyer journey. And effectively what you're doing is almost building a breadcrumb trail across the buyer journey so that different pieces of content are either explicitly or implicitly connected to the other, so that buyers are actually moving through that buying funnel from stage to stage to stage simply by consuming different pieces of content. The next point that I'd make here as well, again coming back to our funnel, is thinking about where you actually place those gates. So if we're actually gating too early, you're actually capturing forms rather than leads. And the problem is here is that if you gate far, far too early, that prospect actually hasn't had the opportunity to really understand what your offering is. So that at the early stages at Discover, they're really trying to understand what their challenges are, what potential solutions are out there as they're moving into Consider. So gating at that very, very early stage won't give you a true indication of somebody who is genuinely a lead for you. Instead, if you're thinking of gating towards perhaps more of a Consider, moving into a Decide phase, that's where absolutely you'll start to see those leads being pulled through. So you can start to see then the difference in the richness of the data that you'll capture, but also then thinking about the intents and the propensity to buy as well will increase as people actually move through that funnel. So the second point then is really thinking about understanding the value of your content. So, as I mentioned before, not all content should be gated. I really believe this quite strongly, simply because, like I say, you need to give your prospects the opportunity to really see the true value of what you're saying, and also that the really important point to mention here is about having pieces of content that are exposed to your web crawlers will actually improve your organic search results as well. The problem is with a lot of landing pages, unless they're built within your website CMS, is that for Google, for instance, the web crawlers won't be able to actually read the data that's on those pages. Therefore, actually having pages within your website that are exposed to web crawlers, so for instance, blogs are a really good way of attracting traffic to you. And again, we wouldn't necessarily recommend that those blogs are gated. So the next point here then is really understanding the value of your content and what information you can ask for in return. That mutual value exchange is something that I talk to my clients about a lot. So if you're asking for a small piece of information, then offering a piece of content in return for that, which again is of a lower value, is absolutely fine. But if you're asking for a lot of information and actually the piece of content that you're offering in return for that isn't as valuable, and that is from the perspective of your prospect, then again you're not going to get as good a return as you would have hoped. So making sure that that is a real balanced view is really, really important. Progressive profiling then makes it possible to not overwhelm the user on any single piece of content. And if you're not quite sure of how this works, and I'm sure Greg will come on to this, but it's just about making sure that you're gathering data across a number of pieces of content rather than to try and make sure that you actually capture everything in the first go. So the next slide that I have to show you is a fantastic infographic from our friends at HubSpot. And I found this really, really useful. I was trying to think of trying to talk to you about how to work out which pieces of content are actually genuinely valuable. And I thought this was just a really nice way of doing that. So obviously you start at the top. Is it any good? And then you can start to work out, okay, yeah, it's good. So what is it? So for instance, if we picked ebook or white paper here, is it largely about your product? Yes, it is. So will the reader learn a skill or lesson? Yes, they will. Will other people share it? Yes, they will. Then yes, it's a fair trade, and absolutely gate that piece of content. If that ebook was largely about your product, and the answer was no, and will other people share it? And the answer to that is no. Then actually we move across right onto the right-hand side of that diagram, and we talk about what's the problem there. So the problem might be bad design, it might be not substantial, or it might be unoriginal. And again, we've got various different options there that we can move through. So could you redesign it? Could you rewrite it? Or could you reimagine that piece of content? And again, like I say, I mean, you'll get these slides at the end of the webinar, but I think it's just a really nice way of being able to logically flow that through and work out actually whether you should be gating those pieces of content or not. So thanks very much to HubSpot for that flowchart. So moving on to point 3 then, and this is where I'll be handing over to Greg.
Thanks, Bonnie. So once you've worked out your gating strategy in terms of what you want to gate, the next stage is to start working through how this is actually going to be deployed. So this is where you normally start working closely with marketing operations, with a web or digital or interactive team, and potentially even IT, depending on the organisation structure that you're operating in. And unfortunately, technology does become the significant part now. As Bonnie said, if we just deploy a gating strategy with landing pages through a marketing automation platform such as Marketo and Eloqua, you're not going to have the same level of findability, shall we say, from an organic search perspective, but even potentially from a social perspective, because you won't have the right integration of social sharing and plugins to enable that, just based on it being a marketing automation landing page that is solely focused around giving someone access to a piece of content. So as I said, this is where you need to involve wider teams to make sure you get that scale, to make sure whatever you're looking to deploy is integrated with all of your web properties and making sure that it scales globally. As again, if we're just the UK marketing team asking for something to be deployed and there's 15 different countries on the global website, the chances are the web team needs to factor in how this is going to work through all the other languages. If it is just for UK, then great, and you'll probably find this far easier to run and to get to scale quickly. But I think this is where understanding how the global web team work, how the CMS works, and how something can be deployed so that everyone can use without technical training is really, really key. So, in terms of how to deploy it, there's really 6 quick, I say quick, there's 6 things that need to be considered when planning this out and work through in collaboration with marketing operations, with the web team, with any sort of business analysts that sort of manage the architecture of your infrastructure. And the first point, and this is the most critical one, is how is this going to integrate with your content management system? How is this going to be something that anyone that has access to the website that wants to gate something going to be able to access? And if you think longer term, this makes a lot of logical sense, because deploying anything through a CMS is far easier than developing custom HTML and even developing custom landing pages. So how can we make sure that the gating we want to be able to deploy works through a CMS? The second one is then working through how this is going to be configured in a CMS. So from here, does the user log in and say, I want a form, and they drag something and drop it into a page template? Or do you have 5 different page templates and they select, I want this one gated, or I want this one gated? And what level of customization do they have within that? So how is this user journey going to work from an authoring perspective? Is it going to be seamless with their existing CMS publishing workflow? Does it need to be approved by anyone? Are they able to create things on any pages or in any structure? And again, this just needs to be thought through about how they're going to be able to configure something within the CMS versus they've got one template that they can't do any customization with. And that's going to be one of the key things in driving adoption, so people feel they're empowered to do what they want, rather than the global team or the web team have just stopped them being able to do what they want. So working through some of those scenarios up front is really useful to get buy-in and adoption in the project. The next one I said, making sure something's easy to publish. One of the biggest barriers around deploying a gating strategy today is the amount of people involved in this. I've already mentioned, if you operate outside of a CMS, you'll probably go to a marketing operations team that will say, well, we've got this form and we need these fields and it needs to have all these fields because we manage this processing and we need this for sales follow-up. And then you've got the web team on the other side saying, well, this is the workflow for deploying a web page and you've got all of these configuration options, and then everyone's already trained in that. How do you bring these two worlds together to make it as easy as possible for someone to set up a form and then press go live? Fourth one, and this is a real critical one, what is the governance around it? So as I said, if someone's configuring the form, what areas can they change and what areas are going to be locked down? We normally try to recommend anything that is natively integrated in the CMS platform, removes the, should we say, the variability of human input. Anything that has manual inputs has a potential to be input slightly differently. So things with capitalization, things with spaces, do they always put underscores, do they put a hyphen? All of these things seem like very small, small details, but when it comes to governance around how the fields are mapped, and also how you track and attribute performance of gating of forms of content, it's really, really critical to understand and govern that at a global level so it works, but then what the regions can deploy and make sure it works in an effective way that everyone understands what's going on and what they need to adhere to. The next one, and this sort of overlaps with the last one, is making sure wherever possible that this is integrated from a tracking and attribution perspective. So anything that can be deployed once and runs off the same engine, off the same code base in the same way, just means when it comes to reporting and understanding what's working, you only need to go to one place and everything's structured consistently. If you're deploying some in a CMS and you're doing some in landing pages and you're doing some on potentially old domains or old websites, all of a sudden these are all probably going to be tracked slightly differently, that when you want to understand what's working, you can't actually tell what's working because it's all measured differently. So making sure it's all integrated together is sort of the next step to manage that governance process. And then the last one is future-proofing for new features. Again, this is something we see all the time with landing pages, that if you have 50 landing pages deployed today and you decide you want a new form or a new form field, you may need to go back through all 50 landing pages and all 50 forms to be able to configure that new feature. If you've built something in the CMS that runs through the same code base, you can potentially just add that field once, and then if it's managed in the cloud effectively, it will update all forms that are previously published. And that's one of the key things when you look at social sign-in or some of the sharing functionality or recommended suggestions after a form completion. If this is all managed in a sort of cloud future-proof way, it makes it far easier to enhance capabilities rather than fix what you've already got. Okay, so on to the last step, number 4. What is the best practice for regional differences? I say this is one of the critical things, that every country has a unique culture, and also every country has different data requirements. So it's all well and good saying we need to develop a governance around this and we need to standardize everything. But at the same time, if everything's the same for everyone, the chances are you won't get the level of form completions you want, and you won't get that perfect user experience, that user journey that we want to try and enable. So this is where we need to work across different regions, different countries, and allow localization, because a high gate in China may be very different to what a high gate might be in North America, for instance. North America may need be comfortable with just saying first name, last name, because they can say Dear John, whereas if you're looking at something like Germany, you won't be able to do that because you need to know a greeting, a salutation, is it male and female, to customize that greeting. And all of these differences need to be factored into that planning and how this is going to work regionally. The other part is each region should be able to make their own decisions. Yes, there needs to be governance globally around this, but if the regions aren't empowered to do what's right for their audiences, for their customers, we're going to find that they're not going to want to adopt this, and it's going to be very hard to get scaled across the organisation. So it's important to make sure they're collaborated with throughout the process. So what does that look like? There's 3 simple steps, and the first one is really around creating this framework. So what is the standards that are going to be, should we say, deployed globally, or at least people need to operate within a global and regional scale? So what's the standard taxonomy going to be? Because we don't want different drop downs in every single region, or if so, we at least need to understand why they need to be different. How are the fields going to map? So again, understanding how that processing works from a form submission all the way through into marketing automation or a CRM system. And then what third-party integrations are going to be needed? And again, are these the same globally? Do you have 5 different email platforms, or do you have one marketing automation platform? And again, working out what framework you're operating in is this first step. The second one is, once you've got this framework, what areas within this can be localized? So again, some fields are going to be mandatory, that you're probably going to want to capture email or first name or last name in whatever countries. But then what fields are flexible? So do you need language drop downs? Some countries you may, some countries you may not. So Canada you may want to drop down, or Belgium, just to understand or determine language. And the same with salutation. The other area really important is around things like field formats. So making phone numbers. UK has a +44 at the start, whereas America typically starts with a 1, and they're used to seeing it in that format, where we may drop the international code and then say what's the region code and what's the number code, so we have 2 fields. Again, going to North America, they're used to seeing things in 1 field or 3 fields, depending on different types of markets. So this all needs to be understood, what needs to be standard globally and what needs to be localized. And then the last point, and this sort of progresses onto that, is the regions need to define what this looks like. And they may have different business needs, different priorities, they may have different sales structures, so they may want to add fields. So it might be really important in North America for people to understand what sector or industry or vertical that a customer's in, so they can send that contact to the correct salesperson. But from an Asia Pacific perspective, they may happy just to have contact details, not know the industry, because they're just going to follow up and have a conversation, because that's what the appetite for contacts or opportunities or leads is. So understanding these regional differences is the third point to really driving this through the region and getting best practices throughout all of the deployments.
Brilliant. So there you have it. So what we've covered today then is what's the difference between a good and a bad gating strategy, understanding the value of your content, and working out what's the best place to gate or not, how to deploy then your gating strategy itself, and then what's the best practice for regional differences and understanding the nuances around that. So the good news is then we've come to question time, and we do have time for a quick question. So just looking through what we've had so far, the question I'm going to pick is, what's the main challenge to overcome in developing or deploying a gating strategy? Greg, did you want to pick that one up?
Yep, so for me, I think the main challenge to overcome is organisation alignment. It's understanding what you want to do and having buy-in from everyone involved. And that goes all the way from sales being aligned to what needs to be managed from a sales follow-up perspective, and then being aware that not every form is going to have every field imaginable on. The same with IT, understanding what the purpose of the project is and how that needs to be deployed. And then alignment within a marketing organisation, from global or regions or campaign planners or marketing operations, about what will the standard forms be, what will the standard fields be, what are the different levels, and how will that be deployed. So as every time you are going to deploy a campaign, you don't waste time discussing around, well, I want this form and these fields, and these are all the fields that are different to the normal one, and this is all the changes that need to be made, because then you're not going to ever get to market because you're just going to discuss these changes. If you can get to a point to say, I want this form, I'm going to leave it exactly as it is, and we're all aligned on that, all of a sudden you'll be able to get to market so much quicker and drive that learning to then inform any changes you want to make down the road. So for me, it's the organisation alignment piece rather than actually how to deploy this.
Yeah, no, good answer there, Greg. Greg, we have had another question come in that I would like to answer if we get time. Is can we explain more about progressive profiling?
Sure. So progressive profiling is effectively understanding more about a contact every time they go through a form. So what you're trying to do is, as you're offering them more value with more content, you're incrementally asking them different data fields. So an example of that could be the first time someone comes to the website, you just ask for them for a first name and an email. So it's a very low gate, and then they have access to potentially anything on the website, but it may well just be they're subscribed to a newsletter, for instance. The second time they would come back and then go to access another piece of content, it would then ask them what their company is and what job function they have. So complete that form and then have access to the content. The next time they come back as the third time, you may ask them about their company size or their greatest challenge they're facing at the minute. And then they have access to the content. So every time they come back, you're teasing more information about them through the forms and through the profiling, but you're also building that relationship and trust to drive them to come back. So you don't offer 10 fields on the first form because you're probably going to have a high abandon rate and not many form submissions, but equally you're not just having one field where you're asking for a name and an email potentially, and you never understand any more about the contact. So it's understanding more incrementally over time.
Brilliant. And just putting you on the spot, Greg, can you think of a website off the top of your head that has a good example of progressive profiling?
Lots do from a consumer perspective, but you don't really realise, and that's what's really clever about deploying progressive profiling. So they may have a very soft sign-up process that gets you in the loop, shall we say. It could be a newsletter, it could be an incentive, it could be a free download or a trial of something. And then as you adopt that trial and you engage, then next time you come back, they may offer you a discount, which they then ask for some more information. And then all of a sudden they understand 3/4 of what they'll ever want to understand about you. So lots of transactional websites have a sort of progressive profiling where they capture a database with a very low gate. They offer some incentives to get a higher gate or another step. And then they try and get you to start transacting, which will effectively be an equivalent of a high gate.
Brilliant. No, that's great, but no websites come to mind. Sorry, just pushing you then.
No, that's fine, Bonnie. We use progressive profiling, so www.lbdga.com. I think currently we have 3 steps within our progressive profiling, so you'll be able to go through the process and see how that works for yourself.
Okay, fantastic. For the person that has asked this question, what we'll do is I'll have a quick chat with Greg after the webinar, and if we can think of any other websites off the top of our heads that have got good progressive profiling, I'll send a note to you with that.
Yeah, so I've definitely got some links I can share offline.
Perfect. Brilliant, thanks Greg. So finally then, just to wrap up, as I mentioned at the top, this is a webinar series that we're running, so we have got some upcoming webinars that you might be interested in, and just related to some of the topics that we've talked about today. So our next webinar is talking about the marketing tech stack, which is on the 31st of August, so just as we come back from the bank holiday. We've got social selling, and we're exploring the world of social selling on the 14th of September with Vicky, who is one of our client success executives here. So she's very actively social selling, and we'll be talking about some of her experiences. We are looking at buyer journeys on the 7th of December, and then marketing automation on the 25th of January. And as usual, if you are interested in any of these upcoming topics, then drop us a line at demandmore@lbdga.com. So just wanted to say thank you for everybody who dialed in today. Thanks to Greg for your thoughts and great pearls of wisdom, and hopefully we'll speak to you soon. Thanks very much. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye bye.